Hi guys, Nick here from Conservation Careers and welcome to the podcast. Now, have you ever met someone and you feel like you've just known them for years? You just clicked. Well, that happened with today's guest and me. Now, Marnix van Holland is the WWF Global Programme Manager for their youth and education work. And before the podcast, we were chatting and getting to know one another. And in the space of about 10 or 15 minutes, we covered so many interesting topics that we jointly took the call to include it in the interview for you guys to listen to. Now, Marnix oversees WWF's youth-orientated work. So that's got an emphasis on countries in the global south, like Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And through his work, he identifies, negotiates, and formulates partnerships in order to mobilize millions of people and dollars to better conserve wildlife across the globe. And during the discussion today, we explore his work in detail and also opportunities presented through a greater focus on involving young people within the conservation movement. We also discuss topics such as innovation, enterprise, sustainable hunting, parachuting conservation into countries from the outside, and much more besides. It's a wide-ranging, fast-paced, and really highly enjoyable conversation. And we join it just before we decided to start the podcast formally. So as always, enjoy. Hi, Marnix.
Hey, how you doing, Nick?
I'm very well. Yeah, really nice to meet you. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for making the connection.
I've just been reading about you online, and I love your background in enterprise innovation, green entrepreneurship, and what you're doing now for youth and nature. So yeah, I think there's a real good alignment actually with where we're both coming from.
Yeah, I mean, you have a similar passion, I believe, right? Or else, I mean, you must be a little bit crazy to set up your own startup and work in this line of work. So yeah, I guess we're both a little bit. How do you say that? We have the same little break in there.
Yeah. I it's a real passion of mine is seeing more enterprise within conservation and wildlife, and seeing more people start their own, enterprises, their own businesses, their own startups, whatever we want to call them. And it's sort of a new movement, but it's still early days, and it's something that I've really enjoyed doing it myself. And it's taken a few years, but we're in a good place now, and I want to see lots more do it. The charity model is brilliant; it does amazing work, but there's another thing out there that also creates impact, called enterprise, and more of that is needed now, I think. Yeah, so we're on the same page.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the last, say, 60 something years of development aid, which was kind of like, if you look back on it, that model didn't bring what we hoped it would, right? Let's also be kind of fair and honest about it. And this, I'm not saying it's a like you said, it's a relatively new approach, but then in the end, a more like market mechanism where with job creation, and also that comes from the thought that regardless of being born a couple of kilometers higher or lower or closer to the equator, doesn't make me any different as a human being. I mean, we're all different, but we're all the same, right? So these models of employment and jobs and businesses, it works in other places as well, right? So why wouldn't it work anywhere else? And
absolutely. And the bits within wildlife conservation that I think have worked today is kind of particularly like within the sort of tourism, ecotourism sector. There's jobs, there's revenue, there's income streams clearly linked to conserving wildlife there when done really well. But it's finding the other examples and growing them, which decouples us from donations, and that need for direct support, which is always going to be needed and is always vital. But the other bit that generates the jobs and the income and is sustainable, that's so important.
Yeah, it reminds me of I was working as back when I thought I wanted to become a diplomat, which I'm terrible at because I do talk a lot, but I also try to connect it with content, which is kind of like where I differ from diplomats that do talk a lot, but are not allowed to say a lot. And I was working from Malaysia, where there's a lot of tropical hardwood is being chopped in Malaysia, and it enters the harbors of Rotterdam and then goes into Europe. So the Netherlands had quite a pivotal role when it comes to not accepting Malay tropical hardwood, while Germany and other countries said sure. But it entered the Netherlands, so there was, we needed to talk. That's how these things go, right? Yeah. And embassies, they do a lot of work, but it's usually all about business and money, actually. And I was together with the then ambassador Paul Beckers. We went to the Ministry of Forestry and Trade, and then this gentleman took a map of the Netherlands 200 years ago, and he said, look at the Netherlands 200 years ago. This green means that it's trees, right? I was like, yeah, the green means it's trees. And then, but I also have one of last week. And then he went like, so where's the green now? And then he took a map of Malaysia, and then he said, this is Malaysia now. It's 72% is still trees. I just wanted to show you, why were you here again? And then, of course, he knew with what type of agenda we came in. So he was just teasing us a little bit, but it really, not a little bit, he was just, but it also kind of changed my mindset, like also when you do step to the table of nature conservation, and you come from a country like where I'm born, where we did, chop down all the trees, and you need to sometimes also listen, or not sometimes, you always need to listen, and also be open-minded. And it's something that I've noticed that WWF, they in many cases do get a foot in the door because it's a big organization, and it's easy to say don't do trophy hunting because you shouldn't shoot animals for fun. And me, on a personal note, I feel the same. I think, but then when it comes to countries with cultural, historical, and being autonomous, sovereign countries, I mean, just because I have a panda patch on the back of my shirt doesn't mean that you need to listen to me, right? And I think reality is complex, right? And
speaks to so much. You're right. It's interesting with like your Malaysian example. It's to sort of come from a developed, affluent country like the Netherlands or the UK or somewhere else, then go elsewhere and say, you can't do what we did in our past. There's quite a kind of deep hypocrisy about that. And I can see the other side totally. Whereas at the same time, we're trying to conserve these really precious resources that remain. Yeah. And it's that sort of tension. And with hunting, like trophy hunting, it makes me reflect a little bit about here in the UK. I don't know what it's like where you are, but like game hunting for pheasants, and partridge is quite a big deal over here, and there's hundreds of thousands and millions of birds are released every year purely to be shot for fun, a little bit for food, but I guess mostly for fun, if I'm honest, and I can see all the downsides of that. And yet at the same time, it's part of the reason we have so many woodlands still within our countryside. And there's the tension around that, I hate to say it, but gamekeepers and farmers over history have maintained the woodland that we still have now as a result because of that practice. And so it's like, I think it shows that everything's interlinked, and it's not black and white, is it?
No, it's no, yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, that's I used to live in Zimbabwe for 2 years in Harare. I actually came to Europe to work for WWF. I was working for a humanitarian organization before that, specifically on job creation for young people. The biggest thing that I've learned throughout the years, also living and working in different countries, is just how to shut up and listen. I'm 2 meters tall. I glow in the dark, so I usually stand out anywhere outside of Northern Europe anyway. And just listen. I remember, small sidestep, I was at an entrepreneurship program in Malawi, and then it was around fisheries and sustainable fishing. And I was kind of moving around, meeting some people, and then I just strolled off, and I met this guy, and I don't know the exact number again, but so we were talking about how many fish, and I'm not really a fisherman. I just fish, and then I fish 8 fish a day on the side. I thought, all right. So if you do this and this and this, you can go to maybe 10 or 16 or 15 fishes. And he goes like, no, 8 fish a day, one for my family,
Yeah.
one for my next door neighbor, another one for my next door neighbor, and two I fry. And so he was really adding up that he needs 8 fishes a week. That's just what he does.
Yeah.
And it also really reminded me of basic capitalism in a
Yes.
way, right? And
Like you're not trying to optimize income, you're just taking what you need.
I think isn't that the most like beautiful mindset when it comes to looking at the world and being there together, and also looking into the future and future generations. Just not go, I need as many fish as I can because I make more money, but we take what we need and look at the boundaries that are there, and just look at the models and the systems that we have in place. I think if we would all have that mindset, I think we would have a much different discussion about the 1.5 degree. We would have all sorts of other problems probably still, but definitely different type of discussions that we're having now.
Yeah, it would take so much pressure off our everyday lives actually if we're not actually trying to almost overachieve all the time because of the capitalist culture that we're all living in. Actually, that sort of sets us in competition against each other. We could actually be living a more sustainable, comfortable life. Yeah.
And it's applauded, right? So it's applauded if you go from 8 fishes to 8,000. Well, actually, you could also say, instead of applauding the failure of the system, you could also kind of, say like, okay, but that's not what we do, right? Of course, you need complete societal systemic change, which I think we do need on certain fronts, or maybe on a lot of fronts, which is difficult, very difficult. But and I think just to kind of bring it back to the entrepreneurship agenda, and I think that there's this new wave of more ethical ways of production that is also linked to a different mindset around consumerism and things like that. I think that is happening. I know for a fact that it's happening around the world, and I think that there is a growing market for that, and that market is going to be everywhere, and there's going to be outliers, and I think that's where society and governments can step in, right? They can kind of moderate that a little bit. It also depends on what type of government, again, difficult, but I think we do know a lot of things now that we didn't know before, and I see friends of mine that 10 years ago would kind of push for more, and they're actually doing less, and actually becoming more happy in the process, right? Which is a positive thing to see.
I think many people, and obviously we see it here at Conservation Careers, people are aspiring to careers that are about impact more than anything, and making feel like you're making a change in the world, that your career means something, you're perhaps leaving a legacy, but you're doing positive change. And it's not about earning huge amounts of money or even status and kudos and anything else that other career paths maybe lead to. It's just about wanting to spend your time on this planet to do good. And that's definitely a huge change in the last 10, 20 years. En masse, people have always thought like that, but more and more people are thinking and feeling like that, I think. We're sort of seeing it at our end. Normally I'd say, okay, let's start the podcast, and blah, blah, blah. But if, with your permission, I'd like to kind of just say we're in the podcast already, because I'm having such an interesting, enjoyable chat. I think it would be a shame to edit this out.
Okay. I'm easygoing.
Thank you. But maybe this is also a good time to maybe formally introduce you into the podcast a little bit too. I normally do an introduction at the front, and I will still do that, but it would be really nice to hear if you could say your name, a job title, and who you work for, and then we can sort of explore things from there.
Good. My name is already a story in itself. My official
it's a long
name.
One. Hold on, everyone.
Hold on. It's my last name is Van Holland. That's an easy one because I'm from Holland, right? That's and I was baptized and named after my 2 grandfathers, Sander and Corné. So my official names are Cornelis Alexander, but my father really wanted to name me Marnix after the author of the Dutch national anthem, because he's a strong pacifist and didn't want to join the army. And I thought it would be funny to give his firstborn son the most nationalistic name on the planet because he didn't want to fight. And my mother didn't want that name, but it just kind of stuck because when I was in the crib, him and his friend went, "Oh, little Marnix, how you doing?" And it just kind of stuck like a nickname.
Yeah.
But in my passport, it officially says Cornelis Alexander. It doesn't say Marnix.
I
So there
see.
you go. A bit longer than a normal name
No,
introduction,
that's great.
I assume. And for a year and a half now, give or take, I work for WWF, WWF International, so not a country office, but overarching for international, specifically on the youth and education agenda.
Great. Yeah, that's you're doing some really interesting work. So you particularly focused around youth and education for WWF. Starting at the top, let's just explain WWF to the audience. I think everyone's heard of WWF. You're probably the most famous conservation organization on the planet, within the public, I would say. But just explain, like, what is WWF? How does it work? Paint us a little picture of the organization, because it's really big and confusing.
Yeah, I think that would be the punchline of whatever I'm going to say now. But so we have our 60th anniversary this year, by the way. So that's a hooray for us. Yeah, what's it like and what do we do? I think a little bit about the setup of the organization. So we're quite decentralized, which I like, because I'm a big fan of empowering people that do the actual work. So we actually don't have a lot of management at international, because the work actually happens on the ground with the country offices. We have about 100 country offices in 100 different countries. And we have international that houses different departments, from brand and communication and that sort of stuff, which kind of has a benefit of having a global view. And I think also for fundraising purposes, there's a benefit there, linking it to other countries and other types of continents. I think that's also where my function kind of came from. They wanted to have a manager that could talk to people in Latin America, link the ideas to Africa or to Asia, but be culturally and contextually sensitive to those countries, of course, being completely different, also politically completely different. And sometimes it just helps to kind of escalate to somebody else. I think I'm just going to go a little bit from left to right here, Nick, but what I like about WWF is it's so big and well known that you get a foot in the door relatively easy. And I always say it's going to be disappointing if I'm the most intelligent guy in the room, but at least I can keep the door open and kind of let everybody that's really smart and has something to say, I can squeeze them in. And I think that's also what I'm trying to do with the youth work that we're doing. Like, hey, we're WWF, the panda? And they go like, yes, can we have a seat at the table? And they go, sure, we all love WWF. And they're like, well, it's not going to be me. It's going to be Tavarar from Kenya, and she's 19, and she actually has something to say to all of you. And
come on in, guys, come on.
There you go. It's also something that we did last year with during UN Youth Day. We developed this youth manifesto together with UNEP and UNDP, and we're like, okay, can we develop this? And then I said, sure, but I don't know about your age, but why not let like young people do it? And they go like, well, yeah, that's not how we operate. It's like, yeah, well, that's how nobody operates, but let's just kind of give it a try. And the cool thing about that manifesto, and it's not even about the content, but the creation part, was we had young people, of which 90% from the global south, kind of co-develop it together. So there was nobody over 30 in that process. And then they themselves went, we only have one person that identifies as an indigenous person. We need more indigenous and it was kind of like what you would like the UN or like the world leaders, how they would operate, but actually they themselves just really became very inclusive and connected the dots, and then they came up with demands, and then everybody in all these bigger organizations, including WWF, they went like, yeah, we can't really support that. It's not really what we did. And then fortunately we said like, okay, that might be true, but is there anything in there that we really oppose to? No. And do we want to support youth? Yes. Then okay, then hush for a second and let's walk with this and let's take this further. And I think at WWF you have the opportunity, and I think actually you have the role and the mandate to operate like that when it comes to youth work. And I'm a big supporter of people taking their own, opinions and making a change. And and if I with my Panda badge on me can support other people's work, that's what I like to do.
Yeah, it's amazing what the brand, if you like, enables. And in just 60 years, sounds like a long time, but that's quick, really, for how big an organization has become, or how important. I hold back from using the word powerful. That's probably the wrong word, but influential is probably a much better word in terms of WWF. It's really, it's impressive. Yeah. So your work's all around youth and involvement of young people. Why is that important to WWF, and why are young people important more generally in the conservation movement? Like, why work on it?
This, from a personal perspective, and also from working at WWF, I see a lot of colleagues that have been working on the youth and education agenda for a long time, doing amazing work. But in all honesty, we are a conservation organization, right? So conservation used to always come first. So talking about the 60 years, conservation meant targeting wildlife, fresh water, forests. That we put that in the middle. So when I talk about the programs that we used to do, I jokingly said, yeah, we used to always put an elephant or a tiger or a lake in the middle of the problem, and then we developed the program. Yeah. And now, also looking at youth, we actually put they're people-centered, they're youth-focused first and foremost. So we put a young person in the middle, and this young person is also difficult to generalize and how everything works. So the people-centered approach to program development is very new to us, or relatively new to us, and we have a lot of pioneers and amazing people that have been doing this for decades as well. But I think we're way more known for conservation work in what I would say a more traditional approach.
Is that because you're trying to enable, I guess, behavioral change, recognizing that the problems, if you like, wildlife are facing are created and therefore can be resolved by humans? So you start with them first. Am I getting it wrong?
No, that is spot on. You should work for WWF. Because I often have difficulties getting that exact message across. And again, not to say anything bad about the amazing work of people that are working on programs, for instance, around tigers, but the work where you focus on the tiger is a vital part of the conservation work. The work around informing people, educating people, and things around human activities and active citizenship around political actions that people can take. All of those are part of the equation as well. And it's kind of like baking a cake, and then maybe the most important thing of this cake is the flour and the eggs. But if you don't have the milk and the butter and a sniff of salt or a bit of sugar, you need all of those components to bake the cake, right? And for me, it's not about what's more important. I think we need all of that. And if you don't bring it together, then it doesn't turn out right? You're right. I mean, it's all about letting people know what type of that their decisions matter, and ordinary people, they also have immense power, strength in numbers, right? I mean, ordinary people can change the world, and it doesn't have to be in the biggest form, but it's about also having that opportunity to take that role and to kind of understand what you can contribute and understand why it's important. And that's where a more people-centered approach, and specifically for young people, and that's why I also love working on that agenda.
I'm trying to think of some examples actually while we're talking, like of young people making a difference, and immediately you think like Greta Thunberg, and you couldn't get a better example than that really for the last few years. A young person making a stand and making a global difference, more than any other individual for the last decade or more for our movement, and it came from youth. When you focus on youth, are you playing the long game? Are you saying if we can change behaviors when they're young, then they're going to be more responsible as adults and the future looks more positive as a result? Or are you also trying to change behaviors because they are influential as young people right now, not just as future adults?
Yeah, I'm a bit sick and tired of the statement, youth is the future
Yeah.
future, that sort of stuff, right? I mean, whether or not that's true, I mean, for me, it's about, because everybody matters. And to come back to the statement with like the work with the fresh water and the wildlife is just as important as the work around the people-centered work, right?
Mm.
And but in many cases, young people have so much like bargaining power in the sense that they have quite a lot of budget to buy stuff, right? So they can literally make or break products,
Mm.
and I think that is sometimes somewhat overlooked. So that's also why I think it's kind of exciting, and there's it's such a fast-paced type of thing. The whole youth domain
They're
also
like
with,
early adopter consumer types, right? They're going to
yeah,
buy an iPhone or they're going to buy something else, so they can change
exactly.
the market, right?
Yeah, and of course this makes an impact in the long run, right? And there's all these studies about the impact when you get connected to nature at an early age, and this affects your other decisions. And so for me, it's I often tell this story about when I came to WWF. I saw this beautiful patchwork of all sorts of different things and colors. I always try to take a helicopter view of the work that we're doing, and I kind of see us working basically from the cradle to the grave around people, because my mind works with people in the middle. That's just my background and where I come from. And I see the work at an early age, and then I see them working on in primary school and education,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to job creation, then when it comes to engagement, and then when it comes to taking political action, and all the way lifelong learners, active citizenship. And that's kind of like in the people domain, and whether it's governments or markets or finance, I see us kind of like, because of the size of the organization, I see us that we can support at any phase in life, anywhere on the planet, any walks of life, whether it's last mile communities that cook on charcoal, where we work with like biogas or solar cooking to improve lives and kind of fight the chopping of firewood, therefore desertification, that sort of stuff. All of these things are connected. And to come back to your previous question about, say, something about WWF, because of that size, and also because of my interest in what have we been doing in this kind of like 0 to 1,000 lifespan, I sometimes say that every week I open a drawer and I find an amazing program, maybe in Pakistan or Bolivia or in Germany, that was implemented 30 years ago, where I go, like, this was way ahead of the pack. This is amazing work. There's so much, and sometimes it's us, sometimes it's a partner organization. I think although we're big, I mean, what do I know about slum dwellers in South Africa, or what do I know about last mile communities in Indonesia, right? I can never fully understand or relate. So in that sense, you also need to partner up with people that basically know better.
Which is what WWF and your network's all about. So you're the international coordinating hub, where you have like in-country representatives that work with in-country partner organizations. And your role, I guess, is to find the bright spots, the things that are working, even in the past, like you were saying 30 years ago, and replicate them and spread them around in other places and learn from them and share from them.
Yep.
What sort of projects are you or programs are you then working on? Can you give us like some examples, maybe bring it to life, some of the kind of youth stuff that you know of or involved with? Or
I think the biggest one that I'm arrogantly going to say that most people know is going to be Earth Hour.
Right.
I think that's the and before I joined WWF, I always thought like, oh yeah, that's like when you turn the lights off for an hour, and yeah, that doesn't really change the world that much. And being a little bit negative about it at the time, and then when I looked at it a little bit more when I was like with the organization, and also pushing that youth piece that I work on, because it is kind of like doing something fun about nature and conservation and climate for once, because it's a very serious type of work, right?
Yeah.
And when you look outside and you see all sorts of erratic weather events, and you see, like or the global, there's all sorts of things that you can think of that would make you very depressed. But Earth Hour is almost like a celebration in itself. And then I saw, oh, but it's not about switching off the lights. It's actually about community building. It's actually about doing something positive, contributing, finding other people that are just as crazy about it as you when it comes to the hard work. And then I was thinking about it, and I made the connection in my head with the ALS campaign, where they threw the ice water over people just to raise awareness, right?
Like 9 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, and but like the switching off the light is kind of like the ice bucket, right? It's a symbolic type of thing, and that should make you think and therefore take longer term action. And I think that's what I really like about Earth Hour, and so that's one of the things that
what difference has Earth Hour made? I mean, you get millions of people involved across the globe, turning lights off, turning on candles, switching off major global monuments, Eiffel Tower, Sydney Opera House, all that sort of stuff. And it must send a big message to political leaders and other people, like, gosh, lots of people care about this stuff. But is it linked to sort of tangible, bigger outcomes, or is it, something less tangible right now?
No, it's I mean, that's the $1 million question, right? I think it's in terms of awareness raising, and in terms of countries, there's not many activities that are bigger than Earth Hour, right? So we have been pushing a larger agenda underneath it. Mm-hmm. But what I like about it is the grassroots kind of like bottom up approach. So I'm kind of I have two sides when it comes to Earth Hour. Like, first, I would love to kind of push certain things, but the actual power is for WWF to let go and let other people do it. So there's a bit of a fight there. When it comes to tangible outputs, there's government decisions that we kind of push. We use the momentum to having the ear of the world for an hour to launch a lot of programs, and again, it's not about us, right? So not only about us. So if other organizations want to launch it on Earth Hour, then we use that platform. For instance, with the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, we launched this. We call it intergenerational dialogues, which is basically a podcast with a younger person and a somewhat older person, and then they have this conversation, right? And if they would have launched it a day before or a day after, it would have been just as amazing. But the fact that we launched it during Earth Hour, they got a little bit more traction, and that's kind of what I think is that's from a personal perspective. That's what I think what the power of Earth Hour is, that it is open for everybody to make Earth Hour what they think Earth Hour is about.
That's really interesting. I've not thought about that before. And it's a bit like the WWF brand, isn't it? Like you're saying, you're opening the door and letting people in. Earth Hour is creating the opportunity for more things to happen. And at the same time, I guess, reinforcing the WWF brand, the bigger organization profile. We all know it's WWF that are doing this, and it's a really big global celebration. So it keeps elevating and allowing to have more influence.
Yeah. And I think if you would ask my colleagues, they don't really care if it would be picked up as WWF. I mean, this is that campaign thing where we become more than the sum of our parts, where we partner up with everybody and everything, and we kind of make a global push all together. And I mean, this year it had a reach of 6.9 billion. So that basically means that any person around the world had the opportunity to connect to it, which is not completely true. This reach and comms thing is a little bit more. And it was in 190 something countries and areas, which is massive, right? And whether it's a young boy or girl, or however this person identifies, that cleans a beach, or whether it is a group of people that pushed for new local laws that really change a certain part of the world. All of it is fine, and all of it contributes. So for me, the Earth Hour is again also like the cake again, right? And everybody, or maybe it's more like a kitchen, and anybody can make their own dish. And
Yeah,
then
there you go.
As WWF, we just open the doors of the kitchen and say, whatever you want to eat, look in the fridge, go crazy.
I like that. I like that. My son likes building Lego, and we watched a show on TV, like Lego Masters, I think it's called, where you walk in and there's just enough Lego to fill the next decade of building. You know, it's a bit like that. Just go and build something. Yeah.
I like that. I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that.
Yeah. So you're global program manager, youth and education. Like, what are the goals of your job, and what does a typical day, week, month, whatever, how would you describe to your grandma or whoever that, you know, what you actually do day to day?
Yeah, good question. So that's funny, because when I came to WWF, I came in to manage the something they call the Global Youth and Education Grant. It's just a program that consists out of multiple programs spread over the world, specifically in the global South, because that's also where my expertise lies, and where I come from professionally. What I really, I mean, I wasn't there yet, so it's not me bragging about what I did. But what my predecessor did was, instead of developing it in the UK or anywhere else, and then pushing it downwards to say, okay, we have this amount of money, let me call the country offices and ask them what they want to do, and then give them the money, and then let them develop it. And yes, we bring in the monitoring and evaluation. We do that centrally, and the connection to the donor, and also linking these countries up, like my job being a convener and a linking pin.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, it seems so normal to take that approach for me, but when you work, for instance, with a large donor like the EU, or they preset everything, right? So they basically say, you need to do A, B, C, D, and here's the budget, and this is what you have to do. But we kind of did it the other way around, which also made kind of like the managing somewhat difficult for me. But also
everyone's
very
doing
exciting.
different things in different ways, right?
Exactly.
But certainly had goals associated with it, you know, that you can access these funds, and for that we want you to achieve something like this. However you go about doing that is down to you on the ground to decide.
Yeah. And all of these programs, they did amazing work. Also, given the fact that the last year and a half has been insane, right? I mean, with the global pandemic. I'm really happy with the connections that I made throughout the organization, and this bottom-up approach to working, and also the respect that comes with it for my colleagues. Because what sometimes happens, and at least in our organization, in some cases, is country X gets a lot of money and goes like, oh, we need to operate in the DRC and in Peru, and they call the colleagues and say like, well, we have this money, can you do A, B, C, D? But our colleagues, of course, also only have 24 hours a day. So the workload then comes on top, and the budget is structured in a way that they cannot hire additional staff on the ground, right? So and the workload rises and rises, and that to me makes for an unhealthy situation. So this is the programming work. The second part is the managing of some of the strategic partnerships, which is relatively easy work, because you talk to people that know everything in their niche, and when you need them, you kind of go like, well, you know better than me, so hey, let's walk together and talk to one another.
Never be the smartest person in the room, right?
Yep. And in the youth agenda, it's often really exciting to see that. I mean, I'm close to 40, and I just kind of go like, how can you be 17 and know all this stuff, right? And like it's very humbling, or also very depressing.
I've said that on the podcast to guests in the past. Yeah, I exactly that, actually. I'm reminded, and I'll point you to this. We did an interview with a guy called Elliot Connor, who runs something called Human Nature Projects out of Australia, a young guy. He was 17 when I interviewed him, but like 2 weeks later, he was turning 18. And the history that he had of things that he'd done, he set up a youth movement across the globe with in-country hubs of people doing all sorts of amazing stuff. He's also developing his films. He's got his podcast thing on the go. He's a TED talker. It's like, how It's so inspiring. It's so
It is.
inspiring.
It is, but sometimes I'm also a bit jealous, Nick. Then sometimes I just kind of go like,
I'm getting old.
for sure, for sure. And the third, so program management, partnerships, and the third one is program development.
Yeah.
And that's where it also links to your question of the goals. So I envision this global program with strategic partners in countries that know better than us in their own niches, and then working on well, I call it the Green Pathways Initiative because of the pathway type of thinking that I explained from my helicopter.
Yes.
That
yes. Cradle to grave, right?
Yeah, and it has four buckets underneath. One would be more on education, whether that's formal or non-formal. The second one is on advocacy and supporting local civil society groups. Third one would be more on job creation and sustainable jobs. And the fourth one would be on engagement. And you would have these four buckets, and then countries around the world would kind of tap into one of these four buckets, or all four of them, or 3 out of 4. And then on top of that, you would kind of manage it and bring it together and scale best practices. Mm-hmm. But everything kind of comes from their bucket. So it's a little bit more organized. My blue side, so to speak, comes into play, where it's a bit more structured. And from there, you can scale what works best. And then what you learn from the education part, you can kind of team up in your advocacy piece, link it to global engagement, set more rules and regulations, that sort of stuff. And that larger program, I always say, like, okay, what's the budget? And then I say it's $1 billion. And they go like, oh, that's a lot to fundraise. It's like, well, we don't have to have it in one chunk. Actually, at WWF, we already started this program 60 years ago. So there's already in-kind contribution that goes way beyond the billion. So
nice.
Let's push for this larger thinking. And it is relatively simple in its setup, but of course in a rollout it's a little bit more difficult. But yeah. So in my daily
you set the ambition big then. You have the strategy. You're a year in post. You've inherited a previous program from someone else who had a really interesting approach. You're now managing that. You're developing the new program. You've got your 4 silos, and you're trying to secure bigger funding to really leverage and get it off the ground. And where does that funding come from? Do you just go to the fundraising team at WWF and say, guys, just as you said, we need $1 billion. We've already invested 200 million over the last 60 years. Help me get the rest. Or are you going now to individual donors? Like, what's the approach to funding that?
Yeah, that's the $1 billion question.
Yeah.
So this has to do with the organizational setup, right? So we have country offices that are linked to the donors in the country. So yes. If you want to go to DFID, you go to the UK. If you want to go to SIDA in Sweden, or if you want to go to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that's in the US. So it's connected to the country offices.
Yeah.
Which on the one hand, I think is really good also for relationship management. On the other hand, it makes it somewhat difficult for me because
they're the gatekeepers.
Yeah, they're the gatekeepers. So you need to kind of, so part of my work is also internal lobbying. A big part of my work is internal lobbying. I need to get people as excited about the stuff that I think will make a difference and a change as I am. So they need to be as excited as I am. And that also connects back to this traditional approach of doing conservation program fundraising, where there's the normal guy on the street, right, with the personal fundraising and how we did that. And the nice thing about that is that a lot of it is unearmarked, so you can really push that into the countries where you can stretch that dollar, whether that's in the DRC or whether that's in the Philippines. You can really make a difference with a sometimes a smaller budget.
Yeah.
But yeah, in theory, it is a program that's not in theory, in practice it's already there. I just need somebody to put the money in, right? So if the fundraisers like it, then they can just run with it because it's not my program, right? So if a fundraiser in Pakistan or in Russia wants to take it and run with it and fundraise it solely for their own country, then go ahead and do it, because it's still the same thinking. But I need to have nothing to do with it. And the moment that people see that, then they kind of go like, okay, so we've been fundraising with the elephant and the forest in the middle. Now we can have a people-centered program. We just need to team up with other partners, which I think is really important and also somewhat new for WWF, because we're big and we used to claim that we could do everything. So this partnership is becoming more and more important. And if people in other countries and their fundraisers pick it up in whatever country, then go out and play. I mean, it's everybody's product.
So it's really so internal lobbying, getting people on the same page, providing them a new product, which is, you know, this youth and education program, which they can fundraise for, allows them access to new partners, new donors. I guess an example of that is something we've both had contact with, you a lot more than me, is the top 100 African conservation leaders, right? You're working with YMCA and other partners, which I guess aren't really sort of typical bedfellows, if you like, partners for WWF, but this allows you to reach those new organizations.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny that you say they're not, because for me, they're typical, because the Y and the Scouts, WASM, they're the biggest youth organizations, right? So for me, they're logical bedfellows, I would always say.
Yes.
But I understand what you mean from a conservation perspective. They're less logical. What is really exciting to see is that the feedback that we get from the Scouts might be a bit more obvious, but also from the Y is that they have a growing group of young people that really want to start being more proactive in the conservation space. Which, of course, to me, that makes total sense, because they get so much information, they see things firsthand, and they just want to do something. They just don't know where to start sometimes.
Yeah, and many of them have a platform now and a following, and a profile. And you're there to elevate and support as a group of organizations.
And what they did through the collaboration in the African continent specifically, they came up with this idea of looking around the African continent and bringing together their front runners. And what I like about the initiative, there's a lot of things that I like, and also AWF, by the way, is also important.
Yes. And WSM.
That they want to build it for the African continent from the African continent. And I think this connects back to the first part of our conversation with the traditional aid and trade, coming from north to south, where they say like, okay, thanks, and highly appreciated, but we have our own experts that are just as good, and we're going to support them. And that's what this initiative is about. And there's 100 amazing young people on that list. And there were, because I was also in the selection committee, there were a couple of hundreds more from all around the continent. And it was super inspiring to just see what they're doing and how they're operating. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I wake up and I go like, almost like crushed by the pressure of trying to change something for the better. And then you see some people that do so much more and with sometimes way less resources. And then you go like, okay, stop being a whiny whatever, and just work a little harder, push a little more, and go for it.
Absolutely. One of the top 100 African conservation leaders was someone we had on our podcast a while ago, and actually helped to connect us a little bit. It was Anthony Ocheng, Tony Wild. Really inspiring photographer, storyteller. And I can only imagine what the other 99 are like, if he's a good example of them. So it's a great thing you're doing there. Our time is fast running away with us, actually, and I'm enjoying our discussion so much. I wish we had more time, but I want to make sure we still got time for some bits we always like to discuss on the podcast, which is around sort of careers advice. Actually, a lot of people listen to us because they're at university or they've graduated, they're in their early career of job hunting and trying to maybe get that first job in the sector, or maybe they're mid-career switchers doing something unrelated, or maybe they feel it's unrelated, but they want to switch in. Like, starting with the first group, I guess, like, early young, conservationists. Like, have you got any advice of those sorts of people? You know, what would help them to get their first job in the market, or what seems to get people going more quickly within the sector?
Yeah, this is because my storyline starts with that ambassador in Malaysia thinking that I was a green energy expert, which I was not, because I'm just a simple, I'm an alpha. I studied political science and philosophy, and he just thought I was somebody else. So I started and from there I made that start, and so I kind of rolled into something just by reading books on the job. So that's just sheer luck. And I think in life, you sometimes just need a bit of luck. But that's not a suggestion, right? But you can actually optimize the amount of luck that you can hit, right? And I think that's where education comes in. And you can optimize getting a job by getting more skills, by getting more connected. So whether that's volunteering jobs, whether or not that's setting up something by yourself, that just stands out, right? I mean, in the end, not everybody has, but people have an education. So that's kind of like the same across the board. Then how are you going to differentiate, right? And that can be by setting something up yourself. Okay, this person then is probably entrepreneurial. Did he or she, or however this person identifies, kind of manage other people, that sort of. So you get different types of skills,
right?
And I think that's always a way of kind of getting a foot in the door in that line of work that you want. The volunteering route. However, I'm also of the school that that a lot of young people work way harder and get paid way less, if anything. And I'm not a big fan of that. And in terms of opportunities, I know I work for WWF now. I would consider myself still relatively young, and that's why I work with somewhat bigger organizations, also because of the things that these bigger organizations can do. And I would see my professional career going to smaller, somewhat more activist type of work as I kind of get older. And that's the strategy that I thought about and also chose. I start with the bigger organizations, take that information and bring that to a smaller group, what I've learned, the context that you get as WWF, and kind of bring that down. That could be an approach when you're young, right? To get that internship at a bigger organization, and because it will probably expand your network a little bit easier.
Yeah, you'll also probably get access to some of the best, most skilled individuals in some of these organizations. The bigger organizations tend to have defined teams of communications and marketing and fundraising and whatever else, specialists. That knowledge can rub off on you, and you can then become a generalist or a specialist. But when you move to another organization, you're a much more rounded individual as a result, right?
Yeah, for sure. And but I think also the amount of jobs in this space is gonna grow eventually. So it is still somewhat niche and small. So I think 40 years ago, people could step into conservation easily because nobody wanted the job. Now I think there's the want to get there is bigger than what's out there, but that what's out there is going to grow, and I think quite rapidly, because we need that to grow. And if I look, for instance, at Europe with the Green Deal and the amount of money that gets pushed into it, with that also comes jobs, right? And I mean, I was a teenager and I quit studying because I wanted to become a musician. And I think my parents were never as unhappy as the moment I told them exactly that. But I was extremely happy. And I know people always say that, like, money is not the most important part, but a combination of being healthy and happy, that goes a long way. So also don't blindly stare towards those big bucks, because I hear this a lot about people wanting to work for larger organizations, say the World Bank or the UN, which are really important institutes. But specifically when you step into a lower tier, you might not be able to move around and shake enough than you might want to do. So maybe those are things that you want to consider later in your career.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah. And it's interesting. It reflects very much what we've said quite a few times here at Conservation Careers about the marketplace, actually, about there's more people looking than ever before. It's a really popular area to be, hunting within. That's the downside. The upside is there's more jobs available than ever before, and they're growing. So yes, it's competitive. But if you can find your niche within the sector, there are more jobs available now and looking like there'll be more into the future as well. So it's a positive place to be kind of focusing your efforts, I think. Final question, really, just purely because of time. I'd love to talk all day, quite genuinely. We often ask people towards the end, like some kind of bigger questions, just to kind of hear how you think and feel about the sector. And what I'm quite interested in is, we see across the planet, conservation, we're having some great successes, some great projects and programs of saving species and habitats and even the whole ecosystems in some places. But generally speaking, biodiversity is more threatened than ever before. Every new report paints a dire picture than ever before. What do we as a conservation movement need to do better or be better at?
Wow. That's you end with an easy question.
Yeah. Build up to that
one. Yeah, the simple answer, we have to do better as humans in general, right? So not just as conservation work. And I think the doing better is not the same as working harder. I think there's a doing smarter and being more connected and more collaboration. I think that's where the answer is. There's this African saying around there's a gentleman chopping wood in the forest with an axe, and then this gentleman walks up and says, if you just stop for a second, we go to the store and we'll get this chainsaw, this electric saw. You can cut down all these trees like real easy in a day, and you don't have to work for a whole year to chop down all these trees. And then the guy says, can't you see I'm really busy chopping this tree? And I think we have that type of approach where we need to kind of step away from bickering, step away from they're not doing it 100% like we want, and really being more than the sum of our parts and pushing forward together. And to me, this links back to this youth manifesto that was developed by young people themselves. Like there's people that actually see that, and I guess when you grow older, I always say it's really easy to be an activist until you have to pay the rent, right? So when you grow up and you get more responsibilities and things become difficult. But if this is where our heart lies, and if we all find this important, then let's push aside the pettiness and really collaborate. And I think that's where the power for real long-term, real change actually lies.
That's really inspiring stuff. Uniting, coming together. Marnix van Holland, thank you so much for your time today. If people want to find out a little bit more about you or your work, people who are listening right now, where should we send them? What should they do?
Yeah, first of all, I would say to everybody, just do your own thing, because everything matters. There's no such thing as something that's too small, right? Not with a bang, but with a whimper, or butterfly effect, if you want. You can always reach out to me or your local WWF office if there's something that you want to work with. Check out our social media work if you see stuff that inspires you or you want to work with. You can always drop me an email. I'm easygoing.
That's a great place to end. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for your time. It's been lovely to chat, and I'm sure we'll stay in touch. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you did, then please do hit the subscribe button. to get notified of new episodes as they drop. And also please give us a rating or a review, because it really helps us to get in front of more people. Now, if you want our help to get clear and get started and get hired as a professional conservationist, I recommend you enroll in our free online training program, exploring how to get a conservation job. So if you're a student, a job seeker, or a career switcher, you'll learn the golden rule about how to get started, the key mistakes to avoid, and also we'll answer your biggest questions. You can check that out at conservation-careers.com/free. See you soon.